to be done to always bring us together. With this, I would request Swapan to.
Thank you very much, Shakti. I was very interested to know what sort of books Shakti Sinha read as a child. Whether he read Dennis Compton, because Dennis Compton was no doubt one of those rare breeds who played both first division football for Arsenal as well as represented England and had that famous series in 1947-48. Or whether Dennis Compton is equally well known for being the first model for Brill cream. I think it was that which probably encouraged Shakti. If I remember him as a little guy in Hindu college in those days. The second book which he read, Balraj Madhok's biography of Syama Prasad Mookerjee, has one very interesting thing which I recalled when Anirban talked about his own Macaulayite legacy, which alas I too share, which is that when Syama Prasad Mookerjee got exposed to North India and he realized that it was necessary to communicate, to be able to speak in Hindi, he, like most Bengalis, had this inevitable problem with gender. A big innovation for all of us. But as far as vocabulary was concerned, he had this easy way out. And Balraj Madhok narrates it. He said whenever he was at a loss for words, he just used the Bengali word. I've often tried this with, and people say, "Aap bahut shuddh Hindi bolte hain." Whether Tagore was the best person to correct Syama Prasad's Bengali prose is, to my mind, a little questionable. Tagore's own prose was at one time was set up in Calcutta as being, they cited a paragraph and they said, rewrite this in Shuddh Bangla. Syama Prasad did his first degree in English literature, in English as they were called. But his second degree was a very curious thing, a degree, an MA in what was called vernacular languages. Now what vernacular languages exactly means, whether it meant the old Indology as meaning Sanskrit and other things, I don't know. But it certainly suggested a certain facility, an equal facility in all language, in at least the three major languages which he came to terms with. Anirban has already talked about his early achievements, and he's also drawn up a wonderful framework on which we can assess Syama Prasad Mookerjee. I think it's important to recognize, and this is something which a lot of the history of what is called the national movement, or whether you call it the history of the early first half of the 20th century in India, sometimes obliterates and ignores, is that every region had a very strong political culture. And that political culture went beyond, or was an addition to, the dominant Gandhian narrative which existed. And this is not only true for Bengal, it's true for Orissa, it's true for Assam, it's true for Uttar Pradesh, all of them. And in that context, it's important to recognize that Syama Prasad Mookerjee was a pillar of Bengal society, of Bengal politics in that era. We've heard about the Bose brothers playing a very important role. But after the death of Chittaranjan Das in 1925, there was a certain void in Bengali politics, which Gandhism never completely filled up. And that the reason for this was that while the political leadership of Gandhi was accepted by more or less everyone, the ideological hegemony of Gandhi was never quite accepted within Bengal. And there were various cross currents which played along. One of these was the revolutionary cross currents, some of it was the Marxist cross currents, some of this was Muslim separatist cross currents. So there were lots of things which were playing along. And it was in that context that Syama Prasad Mookerjee operated. And an equally important role was played was the question of how do you build society. We've heard of we've heard of people like Acharya Prafulla Chandra Ray. Now these were people who were not directly in politics, but who were intensely political. And I think it's important to recognize that people who are important as figures, as inspirational figures, were not necessarily people who were always in the mainstream of the national movement. It might interest you to note that if you look at the vice-chancellors of Calcutta University at that time, and the vice-chancellor he was not a vice-chancellor in the sense of today's vice-chancellors. He was not the sort of CEO. He was a little more, he was a little less and a little more. Little less meaning he didn't actually participate in every departmental meeting, etc. But he was more because he was almost like the chancellor. And you had, for instance, Dr. B.C. Roy, who was the vice-chancellor between 42 and 45. Now, if you look at the dates, it's interesting. Here was a man who became chief minister of West Bengal in 1948, who was a pillar of the Congress, who was vice-chancellor of the university at the height of the Quit India movement. So what I'm trying to suggest is there are various conflicting currents which are in operation at that time. And it is important to look at Syama Prasad Mookerjee, therefore, as not merely a leader of the Hindu Mahasabha, which he became subsequently at that time, but as someone who was a great pillar of society, and the great interventions of those days were, for instance, the biggest thing in Bengal at that time, in the 30s, was on the agitation against the communal award of Ramsay MacDonald. And in this was the point in which Hindu society in Bengal was one, and where the Bengal Congress was completely at variance with the National Congress. And it used to be said there is no real difference between the Congress in Bengal and the Hindu Mahasabha in Bengal. The reason for that is very simple. It was quite evident on these. There were attempts, for example, when they wanted to change the emblem of the Calcutta University. And that was one thing which actually united the whole series of Bengali literary figures, right from Syama Prasad Mookerjee, Sharad Chandra Chatterjee, Neel Ratan Sarkar, everybody almost. They came as one. So, there is often, why I mention this, is that there is often this facile view which is put forward by a lot of people. Oh, these people never participated in the freedom struggle. These were the people who were the biggest in terms of their commitment to India, to commitment to India's nationalism, commitment to India's freedom, commitment to a post-independence India, but whose way of approaching this was very different. So there is no one line in which people can move around. And I think that real issue came about in 1946, and Anirban is quite right to mention that this 70 years of independence, when we mark 70 years of independence on 15th August 2017, it will also be the 50 years of West Bengal. Because there was no such thing as West Bengal prior to that. And the fact that there is a West Bengal and that Kolkata was not subsumed within what was then called East Pakistan had a lot to do, almost entirely to do, with the initiatives of people like Syama Prasad Mookerjee, who took the lead. The logic was very simple. They were opposed implacably to the very idea of partition of India. But once the partition of India became a reality, and after the direct action day of 14th August 1946, it became almost inevitable and unavoidable. The question therefore lay, where will Calcutta go? And it's not merely Calcutta, but will the fact that there is a Muslim League ministry in the province of Bengal, would that mean that the province of Bengal would therefore become a part of Pakistan? So that was the question. And therefore, the demand for another partition of Bengal in 1940, around the time the Radcliffe Award was announced, became a necessity for the very survival of the Bengali Hindus. And it is also one of the colossal tragedies that West Bengal was set up partly to help give the 30% minority of Hindus who were part of what became East Pakistan in 1947. It had a Hindu population of something like 30 or 33%, including districts where the Hindus were in a majority, but which for certain reasons of contiguity and flow of rivers, etc., were, take the case of Jasor and Khulna. So that became to a very large extent a sort of the natural repository of Hindus. And Syama Prasad Mookerjee was quite clear in his mind, in his opposition to the Nehru-Liaquat Pact. When Nehru created this delusion, and this was really a delusion, it was not, they realized that there would be a de facto transfer of the Hindu and Sikh population from what is to today's Pakistan into India. But they pretended that it won't happen in the case of East Pakistan. And that was a delusion, because it didn't happen overnight. It happened in dribs and drabs all along, right from 47, and it probably, I don't think it's even ended now. I was in Dhaka only the other day, and Shakti, we were together at that visit, when we were told that there are at least 400 Hindu families who cross over each day into India, because they hardly cannot live. So the fact that there is today a place they can actually go to owes a lot, almost entirely, to the efforts of Syama Prasad Mookerjee in actually preserving Bengal within India. The sense of Bengal, the culture of Bengal within India. And for that, I think everybody would be permanently indebted to him. But it is also something which, for reasons which are understandable, have systematically been erased from popular history, at least. You can never erase something from history, but you can certainly erase things from popular history. So it's quite reassuring that we are doing this here, because Syama Prasad Mookerjee's papers are kept and preserved in Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, and they're wonderfully kept, and a lot of stuff can happen there. The second issue, which Anirban alluded to, was the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. I think the important thing about Jammu and Kashmir, and when we talk about the contribution of Syama Prasad Mookerjee, what is that? Is it that he managed to resolve the issue of Jammu and Kashmir? No. Because the issue of Jammu and Kashmir had already been cluttered and complicated by the reference to the United Nations Security Council, which kept it alive as some sort of a dispute permanently in the international arena. What Syama Prasad Mookerjee was actually partially successful, and I say partially successful, but actually flagged the issue, is that Jammu and Kashmir must be a natural part, like any other state, of the Indian Union. That there cannot be any difference between Jammu and Kashmir and West Bengal. There cannot be a difference between Jammu and Kashmir and Tamil Nadu or Kerala. And it is that idea which he put up. And it was very, very important at that time for him. And it was intervention of people like him which made sure that at that time, when Article 370 was actually imposed, it was written into the Constitution, and it's still in the Constitution, as a temporary provision. That word temporary provision remains. And it is because of the contribution of people like him who kept on saying the flag must fly there. Today, we still maintain some of the elements of 370, but over the years, whether it was Indira Gandhi or whether it was others, they have all basically ensured that by and large, they felt that 370 in a lot of ways means that India has one hand tied behind its back. And the battle, therefore, for the complete integration of Jammu and Kashmir, which started in 1947-48, is therefore a continuous one. It's a work in progress, but it's important to recognize the pioneers of that movement who led it and who even sacrificed their life in that case, to ensure that it happened. The final point which I want to make is in this question of the formation of the Janasangh. Now, there is a view which sort of says that the Janasangh was basically an Hindu Mahasabha 2.0. That is a view. No doubt there were elements of continuity, but there were important elements of difference. And I think it's important to recognize that what Syama Prasad Mookerjee, and if you look at the Hindu Mahasabha, there was at one level the towering figure of Savarkar, who of course dominated that politics from the 1930s onwards, ever since he came back from the Andamans. But prior to that, it had people like Madan Mohan Malviya, it had people, and if you look at the Bengal Hindu Mahasabha, and that's why I'm trying to locate Syama Prasad Mookerjee in a proper context, you will find that it even had people like Ramanand Chatterjee. Now, there was a book of Ramanand Chatterjee's collection from the Modern Review, which was released a few days. What is significant about it is that the fact that Ramanand Chatterjee presided over the Hindu Mahasabha is somehow embarrassingly lost aside. Airbrushed out of history. But Syama Prasad Mookerjee, it is in that context we have to look upon it. And if you look at one of the most important interventions of Syama Prasad Mookerjee in the Constituent Assembly prior to the 1951-52 elections on the question of the First Amendment to the Constitution. And I think it's worth reading, if today, for instance, when we talk about the idea of the Constitution being the great icon, etc., it's worth going back to some of the debate which took place on the First Amendment. Both Nehru's intervention as well as Syama Prasad Mookerjee's intervention. And the important point which Syama Prasad Mookerjee made is that there is a difference between a law and a constitution. A constitution cannot be something which is tinkered with every day. If you have a preamble to the Constitution of India, there is a certain sanctity about it which is almost permanent. It's not something tomorrow the fashion changes, we add in 2 words. And that speech was very important. So the idea of what might be that Syama Prasad Mookerjee is a constitutionalist in the traditional sense of the word, in a very Burkean sort of way, a person who actually goes in for that constitution and sees the rigidity of it and separates it from laws. Now, laws are something which are there enacted. You can do it today, tomorrow you can change it, you can scrap it, you can modify it. But a constitution is something very, very different. And that idea he put forward very, very, very strongly in these interventions on the First Amendment. And I urge everyone, it's really a forgotten chapter, and I'm very grateful to Anirban, who actually provided me some of the documents on that, of those debates. And it's something which is worth resurrecting and rereading in the context of today's debates. So what Syama Prasad Mookerjee really had in mind when he formed the Janasangh was that a broad church of nationalism, a broad church of nationalism which actually believed in the idea of cultural nationhood. So constitutionalism plus the idea that every nation has a personality. And that personality must be reflected in terms of its polity. And the alliance with Guruji Golwalkar, I call it an alliance. Because they came from very, I'm not saying diametrically opposite traditions, but different traditions. And you can see some of the attempts at that early time to get elements from the old Akali Dal into that. In the formation. It's quite a, the formation of political parties is very important. How they evolve subsequently is another matter. But it's important to see what the original ideas were. Syama Prasad Mookerjee unfortunately didn't live long enough for all these ideas to actually fructify and how they evolve in the context of post-independent India. But he planted the seeds. And many of those currents of being this broad church of nationalism, I think it's important to recognize that a political party must necessarily be a broad church in the context of India. A broad church whose basic canopy must be commonly appreciated. And it's that canopy. It is the idea of democracy, constitutionalism, nationalism, which to my mind made this thing about Syama Prasad Mookerjee invaluable in today's day and age. Its relevance, its contemporary usage. There is no point quoting one extract from somebody and putting it in today. It's the larger message. It's the larger appreciation of the man. It's his relevance which we understand today. As we understand the relevance of a lot of people, we understand the relevance of people like Savarkar. I, for instance, am a great admirer of Savarkar, but I do not agree with his formulations. But that is not necessarily to say that you disagree with every single aspect of it. But it's important that these figures, that Indian nationalism, Indian politics in the 20th century contain diverse elements. It's important to recognize, appreciate, and inculcate, because the idea of a single strand of Indian history has been tried to be attempted, and it's important to contest that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.